Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debbie Silber, and today's guest is Jennifer Gardella, PhD. Jennifer is a survivor of domestic violence at the hands of a sadistic abuser. She shares her story so others can connect and learn to help themselves and victims, survivors in their lives. Domestic violence can take many forms. It's not just in physical abuse, but in mental and emotional too. If you've been thinking you're crazy and you're doing all you can to try and appease your abuser, please stop what you're doing and listen to my conversation with Jennifer. It's going to shed lots of light on what you or someone you love may be going through right now. Here we go. Okay, everybody, we are with Dr. Jennifer Gardella today. This is going to be a very sensitive topic. So I'm giving you a little bit of a warning now. If you have kids around, you may not want them in the room for this one. Totally up to you. Just giving you a little bit of warning. We are talking about abuse. And we're calling this Listen for the Whispers of Abuse, because sometimes it can be subtle. It can be sudden, it can be everything. And we are diving into this with someone who has unfortunately experienced this. So welcome, Dr. Jennifer.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for giving voice to such an important topic.
Yeah. So let's start with your story. Can you tell us why we're talking about this today?
Sure. So my story actually started quite a while ago and as many survivors have this story, with a way and a belief system that's instilled in you as a young child, somehow that you're not worthy enough and that you need to depend on others. And to fast forward, I then wound up attaching myself to an abuser completely unknowingly. What abusers have a masterful way of doing is roping you at the beginning of a relationship, and you truly believe that you are not only the best thing that they've ever, the best person that they've ever met, you're perfect for each other. It's called love bombing, and it's, these moments of massive romance. This is a premeditated plan, by the way, on behalf of the abusers. They know exactly what they're doing. Very few domestic violence stories actually start with, he hit me on the first date or started screaming at me on the first date. And then what happens over time is they, again, masterfully, I say, drag you into the abuser's playground, where suddenly they start to drip in abuse, always remembering and always wanting you to believe that if you behave better, you'll be rewarded with those moments of love bombing again. And
So
it's this cycle. Oh, God.
yeah, I want to get super specific. So first of all, like, how was this a first relationship? Like, how old were you when this started? And can you give us an example of love bombing? A lot of our audience understands it, but for those who aren't sure, like, tell us what that looks like.
Okay, so this was my second abusive relationship, and I was about 45 when it started.
Okay.
And an example of love bombing would be, you're 2 weeks into the relationship, and he says things to you like, oh my gosh, you're the coolest, smartest chick I've ever met. We're perfect for each other. You actually don't know 2 weeks in. And the other would be huge gifts. Maybe it's that designer purse or a piece of jewelry way too early in the relationship, or whisking you off on very expensive, elaborate vacations early on. What they're doing, again, is they're bonding. It's called a trauma bond. They're bonding the victim to them as if this can happen all the time.
Right. Okay. So 2 weeks in, you're getting gifts, you're getting love bombs, you're being told all these great things. What did you make that mean? And especially I imagine, coming out of a previously abusive relationship, you probably thought, without, I guess, understanding that this was any different, thinking, "Ooh, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm being treated so beautifully. Like, this is so nice."
Right. Exactly. And the problem or the issue with that relationship, the second abusive relationship, was comparison, right? He was far more responsible. He had children. Everything that my last abusive relationship was not. And that was a big problem for me because I didn't realize that the abuse was occurring.
And that's really
So very
interesting.
hard. It's very, yeah,
That's really
very
interesting
hard
too,
and tricky
because
to,
right, because think about it. Most people think like they move into another relationship that is very familiar because it's like, okay, I know this. And usually when someone is so different, then it's almost like that could potentially be a good thing because it looks and feels very different than the last one. And what you're saying is it looked and felt very different, but it was the same thing.
it was just an abuser of a different color, right from the Wizard of Oz. You know, that's
Yeah.
really what it was. But here's the most important part. In between relationships, I didn't do the healing. So when you get out of an abusive relationship, you absolutely must do the healing. If you get out of a relationship where love hurts and you do not find a domestic violence center, a trauma coach, someone that is trained in helping you find your core wound that drove you to your abuser, you are just going to go in and find what you're accustomed to. And that's exactly what I did.
I am so glad you said that because people ask me all the time. They come into the PBT Institute. They're like, I'm so sad. I'm so hurt. I just want to have, another partner. I'm like, no, 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 no. The only thing you can do is attract more of the same if you don't do the work. This is why people out of the 5 stages from betrayal to breakthrough, most people stop in stage 3. That's where they live because the healing hasn't happened. They're just doing more of it. This is the time to do the work. And I am so glad you said that. Before we get into what the work was, I want to continue with the story. So tell us so here you are, you're being love bombed, trauma bonding is happening. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah, so slowly but surely, what any abuser does, and certainly what my abuser does, is he slowly but surely pulls you in even more. And suddenly it was, why don't you and your daughters move into my home? Big red flag, my home. It's never going to be our home. Oh, of course we'll get married. Of course, that turned into a disaster. We eventually did get married. And it was just a continual sucking out of my life. I thought, and what they're also masters of, is making sure that you know that everything that you're doing is wrong. And if you just work harder, spend more money to show them that you're not taking advantage of them, spend more time on him away from your business, you work too much. I lost my teaching career because I was working too much for him. I wasn't building my business. I was working too much for him. I always had to be on road trips with him for his business.
So I
Right?
want to stop you right there. So what do you mean you lost your teaching job? You left your job because he was saying that. I just want everybody to understand. So at the time
Yeah.
you thought,
So
okay, I'm working too much. He's telling me I'm too busy. I'm going to leave my teaching career. Is that what happened?
yeah, so I was an adjunct professor, and the last semester that I taught, I'm so honest and transparent about it. It didn't go well because I was never allowed and given the time to dedicate to it that I needed to, because I was allowed to work when he was busy. And
Allowed.
that was a
Ooh,
problem. And if
is that
I was
allowed? Right, that word right there. That's a red flag. Okay, so
right.
yeah. So now here you are. You're at the time. Did it seem like, well, I am kind of busy, and this feels like the right thing to do? Like, what was going on with you?
I I just wanted to make him happy.
Mm,
That's it. I just wanted him to calm down because I knew that we were both completely capable of having a phenomenal relationship together.
yeah.
That's what I was completely convinced of. And I know to some people, it sounds insane, right? Because what's a big thing that we talk about in the world today? Victim, right? Oh, you were you're not a victim. And I disagree with that because there's being a victim, but then there's victim language. I never sat in victim language like, woe is me. I was always trying, pedaling. You're like the frog in the pot of boiling water. I was like the little hamster in the hamster wheel, going and going and going and getting nowhere trying to make him happy. As I look back, it was crazy what was going on, but I was in it and madly in love with him.
Right. Tell
That's
me
a
how
problem.
because you mentioned your kids. how old were they? What was that like for them?
So we were a blended family, and they played a game. My middle daughter did not like him from the start and saw right through him. My younger one obviously lived with us the longest, but my older one also spent a significant amount of time with him. He was fun. They tolerated him. They were able to look over it.
Mhm.
But it was eventually my younger two, who are now in their 20s, that are the ones that got me out. They were finally strong enough to say, Mom, this is abuse. We see you being abused. When he starts to rage, we sit on our cell phones in the basement, scared out of our minds, ready to call the police.
Wow. So,
We
okay,
are not going back there ever again. That's exactly what they told me.
really? Okay, so now it goes from the love bombing, you're madly in love, you're not working as much, you're just trying everything you can to appease him or make him happy or whatever, and that's not working. How did it escalate past that? What was the next level of that? Because I want to be super clear because I know there are so many people listening and watching that are like, oh, wait a second, holy smokes, that's me. So yeah,
Yeah.
let us know what
So,
happened. What was the next level of that?
yeah, so it was the fall of 2019 into the holidays. Some things had happened. A friend of mine said, start to look up narcissism,
Mhm.
which is a word that I don't use a lot because for those divorcing an actual narcissist, using that word can get you into a lot of trouble in court and it can get you into a lot of trouble with an abuser, right? So we don't use that word, but I'm just saying that's what part of my process was. And I started to watch a lot of videos explaining narcissism and I was like, huh. And then I started to watch some things that talked about how it was abuse. And I was like, he's not abusing me. I mean, this isn't abuse. I'm just not making him happy.
Mm.
Then COVID hit. So that was fall of 2019, then COVID hit. House was normally a pot of boiling water. With the pressure of COVID, it was now a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
And my daughters and I decided we needed to get out. And he agreed. He was like, why don't you get out for a little bit? And my daughter's apartment at the University of Pittsburgh happened to be open. Her friends were quarantining with their families, but had left beds and kitchen items. So we were like, well, let's go there. Like, it's a
Mm.
good space. We don't have to live in a hotel. We can just live there. And it was 20 minutes into that journey out to Pittsburgh that they told me that they hit me with it's abuse. We're never going back there again. So what wound up happening was, I did rent an apartment back in town. And that's how about a month later we came back to town and that's how we eventually got out. It took COVID to get me out.
Yeah. And COVID was, I mean, that was a time period where it either brought people together or escalated whatever wasn't working because there was a
No,
magnifying glass on everything.
there was.
Yeah. So what did the girls like? What were they experiencing that had them say, I'm not going back there?
Well, I will say this, and to your listeners, who do have children, I know that you think that you're hiding the abuse from them.
Mm.
And one thing, when my children came to me and they said, we've seen the abuse, we've heard the abuse, one of the first thoughts was, I thought I hid it so well.
Yeah.
Right. So but they were subjected, like, and they had also been working with therapists. Their father had just died. One of their therapists was very strong about what was going on in our home, and they knew what gaslighting was. And they were
Mhm.
like, he gaslights everybody all the time.
Right.
And honestly, I sat there and said, what's that?
Mm.
Like, I got to go look that up, and I was like, wow, my whole world is him gaslighting me.
Yeah.
So he was gaslighting. They saw crystal clear the manipulation, everything about him, the manipulation and control, they were victims of, or they saw their mom being victimized by. And I think that that's something as parents that we really struggle with. Do we want, especially if you share children with an abuser,
Mhm.
that's where things get really sticky because you're going to leave, but they're going to go and have to spend their time with the abuser without you in the house now. But, a lot of victims struggle with, well, do I want the kids to know that I left or do I want them to think that I stayed and fought for the relationship? Like that's a whole quagmire that people go through as well. So yeah, my children had seen a lot, but again, they were strong enough to do their research and know we got to get out of this.
Yeah. So right, and it's truly true because it's still their other parent. if it's,
Sometimes it is their other parent. And
yeah.
then, and I mean, I left a dog behind and almost died leaving the dog. Like, well, now I can't protect the dog anymore. But, and
Right.
it wasn't my dog anyway. But my point is, that is a big decision when an abuser has control over your children for 50% of the time. And many times the courts do not recognize psychological and emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Here in Pennsylvania, they just don't.
Yeah.
So unless he's really, if he's hitting the mom and not hitting the kids, that the kids spend 50% of their time with their dad, even though the courts know that he's a physical abuser. It's crazy what goes on.
That really
So
is.
we
So
have to,
yeah, let's dive into domestic violence. Tell
let's.
us, yeah, tell us what you mean by that. What does it look like? What is it, what's it like? How do you heal from all that?
Yeah, good question. So domestic violence, which is synonymous with domestic abuse, is the process of someone, usually an intimate partner. We hear IPV, intimate partner violence, all the time. The process of someone doing deliberate action to gain power and control over another. So I always make the joke, arguing with your spouse about who's balancing the checkbook, even if it ends up in a screaming match, that may not be domestic violence if he wants to take it over and control the checkbook.
Mm-hmm.
He might be better at it. He might enjoy it. I have no idea. But if there's a systematic pattern of power and control in the relationship, you're living in domestic violence. So this looks like a number of things. He controls the holidays. He controls your schedule. You're never allowed to see your friends, right? He's isolating you from those you love. You're not a partner in the relationship at all. Big red flag. There's levels of abuse. There's those emotional parts of abuse where he plays on your heartstrings all the time. There's also psychological abuse, future faking. Oh, we're going to have the best life. All of those kind of psychological games that they play. And gaslighting also cuts across this.
Mm-hmm.
This is when they try to control you by telling you that you're crazy, that you're lying, that you're the one who's causing all the problems. If you have a lot of screaming in the relationship and you never really understand what started the fight, look
Mm-hmm.
up reactive abuse. Abusers, domestic violence partners, start fights with you to get you to react so you're the one that looks insane. When I heard that, again, it was like learning about gaslighting. I said, oh my gosh, that's everything in my, like, that's what it is. Exactly.
Right.
I had like found my answers. And then I think that, to answer your second question about the healing,
Mm-hmm.
it is critical to do this in the confines of your own person, meaning don't jump into someone else's birdcage, right? Don't start dating again too quickly. I
Yeah.
can't tell you what anyone's healing journey is going to be like because we're all a little different.
Mm-hmm.
I started out at a domestic violence center because I wanted help filing for a restraining order. I have 105 incidents of stalking, harassment, and unwanted communication, which
Yes.
started right as soon as I left.
Mm-hmm.
Called the domestic violence center. Hey, I heard you guys help with, protection from abuse orders. I was sobbing, hysterically crying, scared out of my mind making this phone call. The volunteer on the other side of the phone said, would you like to talk to somebody? And I said, I'm not being hit. What are you talking about? Like, I don't need your services. And she said, ma'am, you're calling a domestic violence center for help with a restraining order. You're hysterically crying and scared. I bet something else is going on. Let's get you some help. 8 sessions of crisis counseling, about 30 sessions of talk therapy, 10 sessions of EMDR, countless support groups. We never kept track. And at least 3 full educational programs. I have a bookshelf full of books, talking with women on Facebook, joining groups, working with coaches.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it took to unravel the mess, break the trauma bond, educate me on what I had been through, and keep me out.
Yeah.
It's that awareness piece and immediate education that coalesce together that then keeps her out, because he's always trying to hoover her back in. I was always, oh, weren't we so great? Let's meet at our favorite restaurant. I miss you. And you're like, oh my gosh, he's going to change.
Yeah.
He's not going to change.
Yeah.
And that's so important for victims in the earliest stages to understand and to have people around them that know what it's like. typically a regular psychologist, right? Your average therapist, who in my area is charging $200 an hour, has no idea at all what it's like to recover from trauma.
Yeah.
Everyone throws around like PTSD and, oh, some sort of trauma in your past. No way. This is completely different. I'm not saying it's better or worse, whatever, on some scale that is not even around. But it is critical to work with a team, a person that you trust and who knows exactly what you're talking about. There wasn't a time, anytime anything happened, my therapist, my support group, the professionals leading those experiences knew exactly what I was going through. They could name it, give other examples, warn me against what was coming, and they were dead on right. That's why it's so critical.
I'm so glad you said that, because we have so many people coming into the PBT Institute with therapy trauma, the most well-meaning therapists, but if they are not highly skilled in our niche here of betrayal, it does more harm than good, because they're minimizing it. They don't understand it. They're actually keeping them stuck in stage 3, rehashing, going over it, going up, thinking. So the person feels heard, validated, understood, and they walk out no closer to moving forward than beforehand. They just feel heard, validated, and understood. They're also re-traumatized. So I'm so glad you said that. Was there Was there one thing in particular where you felt right after a session, an EMDR session, a coaching session, something where you said, "Ooh, that really, something shifted there and something just unlocked and unleashed and I feel better"? Or was it just all of it?
Well, it wasn't all of it for sure, but EMDR was life-changing. Now, remember, by the time a survivor gets to EMDR, you've done a tremendous amount of work. You just don't sign up for EMDR. You've kind of got to go through the talk therapy. You've got to go through programs like yours. You've got to be on the other side of the understanding piece. So the way that I explain EMDR, for those of you who don't know, is that your trauma memories sit on top of your psyche like pond scum. They don't allow light in, and they dictate how you react to things. And that's normal, right? All of our experiences kind of from our past kind of explain how we move forward in many ways. Trauma is different. Trauma, again, sits like pond scum. EMDR breaks up the pond scum. And I have to be honest with you. I mean, I have a PhD in educational psychology and statistics. I had never heard of any of this. I really thought this one was hooey.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean I'm going to sit there and move my eyes or tap my legs? And worse, when my therapist told me that she was going to bring me back into my worst memories of the abuse as part of the process, I was like, I am out.
Yeah.
I do not want to do that. That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
And there was one case, a big part of my abuse was fat shaming. And there was one instance where he really put my life in danger, screaming at me. We were driving, going 80 miles an hour down the Pennsylvania Turnpike. He's enraged, hands off the steering wheel. Why won't you get thinner? And we went back into that memory. Now, I can tell you every EMDR session, I knew what was coming up because that's part of the process, right? We're informed. It's survivor-led, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I started crying before the session started. And it went right through the whole session. But by the end, it was magic what had happened. I felt so much lighter.
Yeah.
And it all of the therapy, all the programs, all the training, all the coaching started to like lift up within me, and I was able to move forward in a different way.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, what's next?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're saying that, because there is so much trauma stored in the tissues. And that's why whenever anybody comes into PBT in stage 2 shock trauma, I always recommend one of our somatic body-based coaches, because that's as important of a role to get the issues out of the tissues as the mental emotional. And I think what most people do is they're like, oh, let me just address this mentally or emotionally. And it's not enough, because that trauma gets stored, and it is stored and it is not released until and unless you choose to release it. And these somatic body-based approaches are an amazing way to do that. EMDR is great. It doesn't work for a lot of people. Other people may want tapping, may want Reiki, may want yoga, trauma-informed yoga. We have our somatic coach who does trauma-informed yoga. And she just
did that too.
Yeah. So there's really there's no one recipe, but the idea is we need to address this physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. You cannot heal just from a mental and emotional place.
Yeah. And I will also say you can't rush the process. Like, you're not ready for higher levels. You talk about them as 5 stages. Mm-hmm. You know, you really need to sit and feel the level. And, you know, there's a devil at every level of anything in life, as I always say. Yeah. But you can't go to EMDR if you don't, you know, and I always say, like, somatic, am I saying that correctly?
Yep, somatic.
will work,
body-based
but you have to understand and possibly have read the book, The Body Keeps the Score. Like, you have to understand that that's what happens. They can't just throw you in trauma-informed yoga if you don't, it's not going to work as well, at least for me. I should only speak for me, but I'm just saying you can't throw her at the high end into level 5 unless she's moved through those other stages.
Yeah. What do you want everybody to know as we wrap up?
I want everyone to know 2 things. For your survivors, your victims who are sitting in it right now, if they're still living in the abuse, it's okay. I know how hard it is to leave, and that you need to be ready, but do some safety planning about that. For anyone who's listening, who's supporting an abuser, a victim, you know, she's dating a jerk, calls the office 50 times a day. Be very gentle. This is not a matter of she's weak and can't leave. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of barriers to leaving and escaping, and she's going to need an unbelievable amount of support to get out. And then for everybody, supporters, victims, survivors, if you haven't done the work, do the work, right? Find a program, find a coach, find a specialist who really resonates with you. And the best part, no one has to know. When I was going through my healing journey, no one knew. Now I'm speaking about it because I want to help others, but it was a very personal experience, and no one had really any idea the amount of work I was doing. And I was embarrassed, and it took a long time to get over that embarrassment and shame. And that's okay. Yeah. Right. That's what I always tell wherever you are, that it's okay. Right.
And I will add, this can happen to men as well. So this isn't just something that happens to women. Absolutely.
And
this can happen to men as well.
Rampant in the LGBTQ community as well. But I got slammed for that actually at one point, because someone said, please take gender out of your discussions. And I said, wait a minute, that's my experience, right? I was a woman abused by a man, which is the stereotypical one. Right. But I am very well aware, 25% of men, 50% of the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
There, you know, it's rampant. It's everywhere.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Okay. Well, Jennifer, where do we go to learn more about you and the great work you do?
So you can go to my website, jennifergardella.com, which is sort of under construction and sort of ready for a guy. So let me know what you think about it.
Perfect. And we will have everything in the show notes. Jennifer, I want to thank you so much. You, with your, you know, for your wisdom, your experience, you're doing something really good with something really painful, and that's worth sharing. So I appreciate you and all you've given our audience today. Thank you. If you or someone you love is going through this right now, I hope you realize that you're not crazy and there's a way out of all of it so you can regain your health, your well-being, and your sanity. Stay in touch with Jennifer by going to jennifergardella.com, and we'll have all of her information in the show notes at thepbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. Gaslighting, manipulation, controlling, isolating, belittling, raging, these are all aspects of abuse. Whether you try counseling, EMDR, books, groups, coaches, or any other avenue, start now so you can slowly move past what may have unfortunately become normal for you. you. Of course, we're here to help you too. Within the PBT Institute, with our incredibly gifted coaches and practitioners, the most loving and supportive community, a proven and predictable way to move through all of it, and so much more. Join us at thepbtinstitute.com. Thanks for listening. Can't wait to be with you next time. And here's to your breakthrough.